This video will show you how to access, submit, and complete BB1, the close reading assignment. So you want to begin with your Blackboard homepage and just navigate to our course page. Once you're there, look for the assignments section of our Blackboard. And you'll see that BB1 is the top assignment. Now it's the same place where you've accessed your reading quizzes up to this point. So there are a couple ways you can proceed here. You can download the document of BB1 from right here without opening the assignment, or you can go ahead and open the assignment and you'll be able to download it from here. Also, once you've opened the assignment, you can see the rubric, and it's a really great idea to go ahead and have a look at the rubric. It's very detailed and it tells you exactly what I'm looking for and how you'll be graded. So I highly recommend just reading through that real quick. Once you have completed your assignment, you will save it as a .doc or .docx file format. I can't accept any other file formats, so no PDFs and no .pages file formats. So if you're on a Mac, you want to double check and make sure that you convert any .pages Word documents into .doc or .docx. Once you've got that and you've named it according to the guidelines that are within the close reading assignment text, you just click on the Browse My Computer button and choose the file. And once it's uploaded, you'll click Submit, and that's your assignment. So those are the logistics of how to complete the assignment. Now I want to show you the model close reading that I've done within the close reading assignment. And I've done a model because close reading can be complex, but it's not mysterious. If you follow the steps in this handout, you'll be able to follow along and complete your own close reading. So I did the sample on a passage from the Epic of Gilgamesh. This was Enkidu's dream that he had right before he died. And if you want to follow along, you can turn to your null, your anthology, page 131. But this is the passage we're looking at. When I entered that house of dust, I saw crowns in a heap. There dwelt the kings, blah, 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 dwelt high priests and acolytes, dwelt reciters of spells, ecstatics, anointers of the great gods, all this. So you can choose a passage that's shorter than this, longer than this. You do want it to be a kind of coherent passage, though. You don't want to do an entire chapter or an entire tablet or anything like that. But something that has coherence and that catches your attention. So for me, the thing that caught my attention in this passage was that Gilgamesh says, "My friend had a dream needing no interpretation." And that was really unusual because there were so many dreams in the Epic of Gilgamesh and all of them needed interpretation, and that was a whole big thing. They had to go ask someone, what does this dream mean? And so that jumped out at me, and that's why I chose this passage. And so step one of your close reading should be determine the literal meaning. So what does it say? This is not trying to figure out what the interpretation should be or what the secret meaning is or anything like that. It's really just covering the content. What does it say? So this passage in the Epic of Gilgamesh says that Enkidu had a dream that needed no interpretation. In the dream, Enkidu entered a house of dust, saw a variety of people that included religious people and deities, and had one of the people ask who brought him there. When he awakes, Enkidu asks Gilgamesh not to forget him and his deeds. So that's just our little content summary, step one. Step two, notice what jumped out at you. So as I said, I noticed that final line that the dream doesn't need interpretation. And most of the dreams are much more abstract than this one is, but I don't really trust it when it tells me that something doesn't need interpretation. That seems to me like, I should pay attention. But the other thing that I noticed in this passage was the repetition of the word dwelt. Now in step three, you start gathering your observations, you're going to pull together your evidence and start putting those pieces together to figure out what it tells you. So when I tracked the repetition of the word dwelt, I discovered that this verb was always paired with a subject that had some kind of status. So dwelt is our verb, and you can see it's repeated here 1, 2, 3, 6 times. And it's paired with kings, high priests, acolytes, reciters of spells, ecstatics, anointers, a king, a queen, a god. So all of the nouns that dwelt is paired with have some kind of status. They're like titles. Based on the repetition of the word dwelt, This passage seems very interested in where these people stay, so where they dwell, which we know from the passage is in the house of dust. That was the first line of the passage. Based on all of the titles, this passage also seems interested in people who have power and status. Okay, so we just kind of pulled our observations together. We pulled out some of the evidence we want to look closely at. So then in step 4, you want to start walking yourself through your own evidence so that you can articulate your logic in a step-by-step manner that will allow a reader to understand what your thought process was. So this is a way of prepping for writing a close reading. So here, for me, the repetition of both dwelt and the titles of people of status creates a connection between the two, implying that the passage wants readers to think about where these people of status live. This passage mentions twice that the place Enkidu is seeing in his dream is the house of dust. So both at the beginning and towards the end it mentions this. Furthermore, the reader learns a bit more about this location through the second and third lines of the passage, which say, I saw crowns in a heap. There dwelt the kings, the crowned heads who once ruled the land. The crowns in a heap line implies that the crowns are no longer in use because they're piled up in this house of dust. The next line uses the past tense to describe the kings ruling the land. So it says, who once ruled the land. So it tells us that these kings no longer rule in the land. The second to last line, in which Enkidu asks Gilgamesh to remember him and his deeds, implies that Enkidu is thinking about when his own life becomes the past tense and he is no longer a hero, just like the kings are no longer rulers. So in this step, we pulled all the evidence together, we pulled together the things that we had noticed, and we tried to understand what those things might be communicating to us as readers. Now in step 5, we're going to start comparing and trying to figure out the relationship between these different aspects that we've noticed. So the relationship between the repetition of dwelt and the people of status asks us to pay attention to where these important people live in the context of the passage. And the passage sets up the location as undesirable by describing it as a house of dust where crowns lie in heaps. The past tense description of the kings, who once ruled the land, tells the reader that Enkidu is dreaming about the underworld, about where people end up after they die. The variety of characters that Enkidu sees, outlined in step 3 above, points out that all of these important people, kings, religious leaders, and magic users, all end up dead in the end. The final section, where Enkidu has awoken from the dream and asked Gilgamesh to remember him, and where Gilgamesh somberly states that Enkidu's dream needs no interpretation, this section connects Enkidu and Gilgamesh to all the people Enkidu saw in the underworld. Just like all of these powerful people, Enkidu is about to die. He's about to become past tense. And Gilgamesh is sobered by this dream that reminds him of the clear truth of his friend's mortality. And you might remember that Enkidu's death is a turning point for Gilgamesh, where Gilgamesh starts to fear and dread his own mortality, and he goes on his quest to try to attain immortality. So in step 6, we're going to connect those relationships that we just established to the larger context of the text. This passage becomes important to the Epic of Gilgamesh as a whole because Gilgamesh has been concerned about being remembered throughout the text. The text itself opens with an explanation of why Gilgamesh is famous. It recounts his various deeds that make him a hero and for which he will be remembered. So Enkidu's request to be remembered fits right in with Gilgamesh's concerns and desires. Then, after Enkidu's death, Gilgamesh becomes obsessed with immortality. He's desperate to avoid death and becoming a figure of the past like Enkidu and the former kings of Enkidu's dream. So here we've figured out how does this one little passage relate to the storyline as a whole? Does it connect to the events that are happening in the text on a larger scale? Is it important beyond just the passage? Now in step 7 is where we try to identify that big picture. So how does this passage affect the reader's understanding of the text as a whole? So the variety of important people in Enkidu's dream foreshadows to the reader that Gilgamesh, no matter how important he becomes and no matter what amazing deeds he does, will also die one day. This foreshadowing hints that Gilgamesh will fail in his quest to attain immortality and that someday he too will become a king who once ruled the land. This passage encourages both Gilgamesh and readers to consider their own mortality, recognizing that fame and high status doesn't save anyone from death. So here I've connected that passage to larger themes in the Epic of Gilgamesh to how it might affect a reader and the way the reader thinks about the text as a whole, and perhaps even how the reader thinks about him or herself beyond the text. So for you, you're going to choose a passage from one of the 4 texts listed above. That's the Epic of Gilgamesh, Genesis, Job, and Hesiod's Theogony and Works of Days. And look for passages that seem interesting to you, or maybe a passage that bothers you. You feel like there's something weird about it. Those are always great when you start trying to pick them apart. But whatever passage you want to choose is fine. Now, you'll type your answers here right below the questions here. So you can see I've got a little sample here. You'll just type in my answer is, or the passage says, and you'll do this for each of your questions. So there's 7 sections. Each of the steps has some guiding questions that I've set in there. You don't necessarily have to answer every single question if you've already accomplished what that step asks you to do. So what seemed striking in the passage and what jumped out at you when you read it, those are similar questions. They're just meant to help you figure out why you're looking at the passage you're looking at. Once you get to the step where you are thinking about figures of speech, which is step 2, you could look at these figures of speech right here in this chart. I've just listed some that you'll find in all of the 4 texts that you can pick from. Not necessarily every passage of every text will have all of these, but all of those texts have these figures of speech. And then finally, I would like for you to save your file according to this file format. So your last name, your first initial, and then BB1, which is the name of the assignment. So for example, my last name is Aldebol-Hazle, so I put that first, and then my first initial is K, and then BB1. So that's what it should look like. And again, that should be in .doc or .docx file format. So that is how you conduct a close reading, and that's how you can complete this assignment. If you do have questions, please come to my office hours, talk to me in class, email me, post a question in the Q&A forum, which is in the discussion area of our Blackboard, and I will be happy to help you out.